Hi, this is Dr. Tom Rogers at Performance Medicine, the Common Sense MD, coming to you today. I'm going to talk about something really fun today. I'm actually going to do a book review. One of my Q&A participants turned me on to this book, which I'll show you a picture of. It's called The Glucose Revolution. It's written by a biochemist, and her name's Jessie. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce her last name. It would do her injustice. She's French. But anyway, this is a really smart biochemist who puts into plain words a very complex subject, talking about glucose, the various forms, and insulin, and what it does to your body from a biochemical aspect. But she makes it real simple, and I'm going to make it even more simple. I'm going to give you some practical, what I'm going to call carb hacks that you can do to improve everything about your metabolism, lose weight, prevent illnesses, help lift brain fog, just everything. I love this. I've actually put into practice a lot of these principles, and I can notice a big difference. And so I'm going to kind of simplify it for you. And there's some hacks I'll mention at the end of this podcast that are going to be very useful and allow you to eat a few more carbs than otherwise I would tell you to eat. Because in the many years I've been practicing and having two diabetic children, type 1, I'm always talking about sugar and insulin and weight loss and things you can do to lower your carb intake. I always talk about very low, for weight loss at least, very low carb diet and intermittent fasting. And this works really well with this. It just gives you a few more hacks, and maybe you can understand the various forms of carbohydrates a little bit better. So I'm going to kind of dig into that, explain to you some of these things. Now, um, let's talk about glucose. Glucose is the body's main energy source. Um, 88% of Americans have dysregulated glucose metabolism, me included, for sure. Um, Even if you're not overweight, that's 88% of us. When we check, I'm a doctor, and when I check your labs, I go to a little bit further extent on things, but most doctors just check fasting blood sugar and a hemoglobin A1C, which is an average sugar of the past 3 months. And really, they may be normal, but you may be spiking your glucose. And it turns out that's what does the damage, are these glucose and insulin spikes. So you could have a good average sugar, but if you're eating the wrong kind of foods in the wrong order and you get these glucose spikes, then that's what's damaging your endothelial cells of your, that's the lining of your blood vessels, leads to heart disease and also your organs. If you tuned into one of my podcasts earlier this year, you saw me wear a continuous glucose monitor for a couple of weeks. And I'm not a diabetic, but that was a very useful exercise for me. I'm going to do it again, especially now that I've read this book. She wears one continuously, and she's not a diabetic, and has encouraged all these people at Stanford to do the same thing, and they're amazed by how insulin resistant they really are. So, kind of like wearing my Aura ring, tells me about my sleep patterns. A continuous glucose monitor is really helpful, and you can get these fairly inexpensively at Target now. So I encourage you to do that, to really find out what your sugars are doing, because if they're spiking, they're doing damage, even though you may not be a diabetic. So that's what we're going to talk about, ways to prevent these spikes. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you some common sense hacks that you probably don't know about that can really blunt this effect down without cutting all your carbs down. So let's talk about glucose, since that's the name of the book, The Glucose Revolution. Glucose is made from the process of photosynthesis, where the sun hits the plants, and the plants, with a combination of carbon dioxide and water, they make glucose, which is your main energy source. Um, Now, talk about carbs. Carbs really come in four different forms. Starches, which are just glucose molecules linked together. They're they come from plants. When you talk about starches, glucose molecules linked together. Then you have fiber, which is made from trunks, branches, and leaves. Think broccoli, think vegetables. Um, Broccoli actually has it's carbs, but most of those carbs are fiber, so you get very little glucose spike from eating broccoli, for example. Then you have fructose. You think of fructose, you think about fruits, which is true. Um, Fructose is 2 times sweeter than glucose. Um, Plants transform glucose into fructose. They do that in order to make their fruits taste better so they can spread their seeds and propagate. That's kind of how that works. Then you have sucrose, which is a combination of glucose and fructose. Um, so note, glucose is necessary, essential to fuel your body. Fructose is not. Fructose is not necessary, unlike glucose. It cannot be burned by our muscles for fuel. I'm not saying some forms of fructose aren't good. Some of them are, like the low glycemic berries. But fructose turns to fat very easily, and it also doesn't fill you up. You can eat a lot of fruits that doesn't fill you up. And the worst thing is a man-made substance called high fructose corn syrup. I think of all the man-made substances besides COVID, high fructose corn syrup may be the worst. So this fructose, it causes glycation, which basically means browning, damaging browning of your organs and the lining of your blood vessels, your endothelium. Fructose, it's 10 times more damaging than glucose to your body. Think free radicals, oxidative stress, inflammation, which is the root of all disease. Remember that. And remember, by processing food, they strip all the fiber out of it. And that's where you get all the damage by these processed foods. The good part, the fiber, is gone. So, with food, sweetness is nature's most sought after taste. We all want that sweetness. You get hits of dopamine, that reward hormone, when you eat sugar. And so the other thing about fructose is you can't measure it. When you wear one of these glucose monitors, it doesn't measure your fructose, which is a lot more damaging than even the glucose spikes that you can actually see. So whenever you have these glucose and insulin spikes, you can measure insulin spikes through a blood test, not through a continuous glucose monitor. But you can measure those insulin spikes. Insulin's damaging, remember that. Necessary but damaging in high amounts. So you get glucose and insulin spikes that you can actually measure, but you can't measure the fructose spikes, which are worse. But you can be assured when you get those glucose spikes, thereby insulin spikes, you're going to get fructose spikes as well. To just assume that. What if there were no glucose in our diets? Our body would make its own glucose. We don't do photosynthesis like plants do, but our liver can make it from proteins and fats. It's called gluconeogenesis. So our bodies can make it. You could actually survive with no carbs. You die without fat or protein. I've told many of my patients that on a daily basis. So our bodies can produce it. And that's gluconeogenesis is kind of, you could call it metabolic flexibility. That's how ketosis works, really. Extremely low carbs pushes the body into burning fat. But most people can't stay in ketosis. I like ketosis, but I can't stay in it. Neither can 99% of my patients. And in ketosis, it can affect your thyroid. I really don't recommend it long term. Short term, I like it. Um, but there are some hacks to avoid these harmful glucose and insulin spikes and fructose spikes. So you always have to talk about insulin. Its job is to stash excess glucose um, into storage units in the body, keeping it out of the circulation where it causes glycation and damage on our organs and blood vessels. So the insulin stores it in the liver. If it's too much, think fatty liver. And our muscles, think energy for movement. That's where you want to go. It's much better at storing it than the liver. It can store a lot more than the liver can. The problem is, once it's all stored, if you're eating too many carbs and glucose in all the forms except for fiber, then you've got more glucose that's coming in. It turns to fat, plain and simple. Think on your hips, on your thighs, on your belly, on your face, in between your organs, which is called visceral fat, which is the worst. So we need our insulin levels low. If your insulin levels are elevated, you're going to be hungry all the time. That's what people that are hungry all the time have elevated insulin levels. There's a lot of things you can do to decrease that insulin, even medicines that I use every day. But we're not going to talk about medicines today. We're talking about other hacks that you can do. And of course, the first one's eating less carbs, more fiber, less carbs. But I'm going to give you some hacks on ways that you can eat some carbs, because everybody wants to eat dessert occasionally and, occasional half a cookie. So we need our insulin levels low. Remember that. So think about what sugar spikes can do to your body. You've all experienced them. I certainly have. It makes you feel bad when you eat sugar by itself. You get exhausted. You have brain fog. You have cravings. You get stressed. You can get dizzy. You can sweat. You can get nauseated. You can have palpitations. You can have a poor mood. Think of the word hangry. When you have hangriness, you're craving some sugars because your insulin level's too high, you're spiking. You want more. So constant hunger is certainly a symptom of high insulin levels. It also messes up, these spikes mess your hormones up. They control your metabolism, like leptin, which is a hormone produced by your gut that tells you you're full. So you don't have that signal to tell you you're full. It also affects ghrelin, the hormone that tells you you're hungry. So those get messed up, and so you've got all this dysregulation going on, and you're going to get fat if you don't think about this. And we're talking about all kinds of diseases that are caused by this. Cholesterol is not the villain. Insulin and sugar are the villain in all diseases. We need to focus more on that than cholesterol, which doesn't cause heart disease in the first place. But excess sugar sure can. But we're talking about all kinds of diseases. Heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, which is type 3 diabetes, gut problems, depression, PCOS that women have, and of course, diabetes. So you've got every reason in the world to use some of these hacks that I'm going to go over right now to blunt that glucose, fructose, and insulin spike that does all the damage. The first thing I want to mention is something I really didn't give a lot of thought to, but this book really, really poured it out to me, and it certainly changed the way I eat things. The order in which you eat your food. And it turns out you should eat your fiber first, your protein and fats next. The last thing you should eat should be your carbs. What fiber does is decrease the action of amylase. Amylase breaks down your starch into glucose molecules. So you're decreasing that. Fiber also decreases gastric emptying and creates a mesh that makes it harder for glucose to go straight to your blood cells. So um, that's how it works. So eat your veggies first. The order in which you eat things. Don't eat your carbs first. Don't eat that bread that the restaurant puts out on your table first. Um, eat some veggies first. And you can eat a meal in one sitting, but make sure your carbs are the last thing you eat, or definitely eat it with it. The second hack is one I talk about all the time. It's intermittent fasting. That's the timing that you eat your food. Personally, almost every day of the week, except maybe once on the weekends, I do intermittent fasting. I love it. It's really helped me feel better. I feel stronger, less hungry, increased brain power. It's a good hack, and it really allows you to eat some carbs during that window that you're going to eat and tolerate them better. Personally, I try not to eat after 7 p.m. until lunch the next day. I don't eat breakfast. Black coffee or water. It's a really good hack. Here's another interesting hack, something I haven't really timed in the past that I've consumed, but this really changed the way I looked at apple cider vinegar. And I really, by reading this book, understood how it actually worked. We use it for all kinds of things, like for gut, we use it for arthritis. But it also blunts down the glucose spikes. What you do, before you eat a meal, preferably about 10 to 20 minutes before, put 1 tablespoon in an 8-ounce glass of water and drink it. It's terrible if you just took that tablespoon, but when you dilute it with water, it doesn't taste so bad at all. The acetic acid in this really inactivates that enzyme I'm talking about before, amylase, which breaks down starch into sugar. So you're slowing down that glucose again that gets to the bloodstream. And it also, apple cider vinegar actually makes your muscles work better. It actually tells your DNA to reprogram so that your mitochondria burn more fat. So that's apple cider vinegar. Ideally before a meal, but it really works well before, during, or after a meal. Just make sure you do it within 20 minutes of when you ate, but preferably before a meal. That's what I do. They did some interesting studies with apple cider vinegar. They took a couple groups of people. They ate the exact same thing. The people that consumed apple cider vinegar before the meal lost twice the weight that the other group did. Twice the weight, and they definitely lost a lot more inches on them too. So also they did a small study with women with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a metabolic syndrome of too much insulin. Leads to diabetes, obesity, reproductive problems, crazy, painful periods that space out. And it's a tough disease. Usually starts in teenage years. Many women come to me for this, and there's ways to treat it. But when they put these PCOS women on apple cider vinegar before their meals, 4 out of 7 of these women, small study, got regular, normal periods back. So that was pretty amazing, and I wish they'd do a lot bigger study on that. But there's no money in apple cider vinegar. It costs about $10 a big bottle of it, so you're not going to get any pharmaceutical companies trying to study this. So that's a good hack. Apple cider vinegar, everybody should have some in their house. Here's another hack. After you eat a meal, move. Glucose, when you ingest it, it can go one of two ways. It can either, if you're sedentary, it turns to fat, plain and simple. If you move, you'll burn it off. It makes your mitochondria work better, and it decreases those glucose and insulin spikes. So just 10 minutes of walking after your meal helps. Personally, I've started waiting 10 minutes, then I'll walk for 10 minutes, maybe sometimes 20 minutes. And you can work out or walk up to 70 minutes after a meal, and it really helps you. If I wait too long and sit down after a meal, I get a little sleepy and I won't want to do it. So I do it pretty quickly after a meal. Now, resistance exercise, which means weightlifting or bands, etc., they even burn more fat off your body after you eat. So, I don't like to pump a lot of iron after a meal. I like to do my exercise in the morning during that fasting period. There's pros and cons of that, but that's when I like to do it. But really, so I recommend if you're going to do a little resistance training after your meal, just do it for about 10 minutes, like body weight squats, things like that. So it's not extremely strenuous, but that work your muscles out a little bit. So a combination of body squats and walking to me is the ideal thing I do. Um, so this combo of apple cider vinegar and moving right after a meal have really helped me tremendously. So use them in combo. Um, one last thing, one last hack, don't eat naked carbs. And what I mean about naked carbs is carbs that don't have anything else around them, like protein and fat. If you eat them by themselves, they're going to spike your sugar and insulin levels. And adding fat to a carb does not raise insulin levels. Plain and simple, it does not do it, contrary to popular opinion. As I've always said, fats are good. Fats don't make you fat. Fats keep you full. They burn energy much more efficiently than carbs or even protein. So fats are good. There's different kinds of fats, as we always talk about, but I do like good fats to be the majority of your meal. So these are just some of the hacks that you can do that will allow you to eat more carbohydrates. And again, when you choose desserts, which you should eat following a meal, that follows along with the order of which you eat things, choose some fruits that have fiber in them. I don't like the high glycemic fruits a whole lot, like bananas and melons and grapes and mangoes. Those are high glycemic. I like the berries a lot better. But so anyway, I hope this helps you in our journey to stay fit and lean and keep our brains working and prevent inflammation. I think this goes a long way to helping you with just a few simple hacks of your carbohydrates. So I hope you take this information and use it daily. I'll see you next week. Thank you.